All right, welcome back into the One Giant podcast draft coverage, as we prepare ourselves for the 99th selection for the New York Football Giants. Sitting here in the third round, the Bills just took running back Zach Moss, so they get themselves a very good running back. And obviously, as these names start to fall a little bit, you'll find them certainly getting some value selections later in the draft. Going to be interesting to see, though, as we work our way towards it. And I just try to update one of my streams here. Could take just a moment. So we'll go ahead and get this updated for ourselves and then continue to dive in on our full draft coverage here. But what we're concerned about, and we're going to have to recap it momentarily once we get Sportscaster up and running. And it'll be interesting to see for the Giants. Centers have been coming off the board here throughout this round. Cushenberry lasted a lot longer than anticipated, but did still find himself going off the board here in the 80s. Probably about a good 20 selections behind where you would have expected him to go. For the New York Football Giants, you've also seen Hennessy get taken here early on. And we'll take one moment just to get ourselves fully set up here on Sportscaster, and then we'll just recap and continue to roll. Okay, so as we get ourselves back set up here with our coverage over on Sportscaster, we can go ahead and just briefly recap what we've seen here so far. Obviously, highlighting that the New York Football Giants went in the first round with the left tackle, Andrew Thomas out of Georgia. We got a great pick there at the top of the second round in Xavier McKinney. And now we find ourselves with the Patriots pick coming in here at 87, just a little over 10 picks, 12 picks away from the New York Football Giants getting themselves back on the clock and having an opportunity, hopefully, to improve this roster. The question that we're going to have to take a look at here as we continue to dive in on this is, where's the value going to be? So as we were just highlighting, when you take a look at the board and available players that are coming off right now, as the Patriots will have their selection called out here by Roger Goodell as he tries to pump up the faithful for the Patriots, who are all booing Goodell succinctly in the background there. We talk about players that are available. Let's see where the Patriots go. They take a chance there on Anfernee Jennings, so he'll come off the board, one of the players that we were about to start highlighting here for the New York Football Giants. So, okay, with about 12 selections to go, you look at the top of the board right now, there's a lot of players at a lot of positions that the Giants aren't going to be looking to necessarily be drafting here, need and also value. So Jordan Elliott, the defensive tackle, a couple of quarterbacks in Fromm and Eason still available there. You get into the tight end, Trotman out of Dayton, and then you get into a couple of cornerbacks. So you don't really start to see until about 8th best player on the board, if you wanted to say Trey Adams, if maybe the Giants were going to continue to try to build out the offensive line in some capacity. Obviously, center is a position of need. Obviously, edge rusher remains a position of need as well. So when you continue to work through here, the first one you come across maybe is a Troy Dye. You could think about the 6'3", 230-pound product out of Oregon. Certainly lines up in a way in terms of size and weight to be a guy that could come off the edge for you, listed as an outside linebacker. 78th ranked overall on the big board. You're talking about good instincts, nice range, showed decent strength, and flashes the ability to get off the block despite playing with a cast on his hand for the final 8 games of the 2019 season. He reads the quarterback and shows good overall awareness and coverage. He is an instinctive pass rusher who flashes the ability to slip blocks and closes well. Everything about that reads pretty strong from a Giants perspective, and I think if you're talking about getting yourself now in what'll be 11 picks away, that's a prospect that you could certainly get behind from a New York Football Giants perspective. Now, he's listed as 11th highest on the board, but when, again, you talk about all these teams around the league right now, not everybody is looking at this board and saying, well, there's 9 or 10 available players here ahead of this particular target. This is about fitting need, and then also at what point of the draft. So right now, because he was 78th overall, him falling a little bit here and maybe coming to us at 99 would obviously be an ideal scenario. And as we just check in real quick here with Andy Makowitz, certainly if he was there, that'd be someone you could look at. We've seen Anfernee Jennings come off. We saw Terrell Lewis come off. So these outside edge linebacker players are starting to move off the board, not going to necessarily be guaranteed. Davis Gaither, who's a little bit further down the list there, he's listed as the 85th overall prospect, 6'2", 224. So this is where you start to get into a little bit on the lighter side and almost into that hybrid-ish area in terms of maybe being able to drop back into coverage a little bit. I don't think that Gaither is necessarily designed that way. Rangy outside linebacker, has a good motor. He's light with short arms, so there is naturally going to be concerns about his ability to hold up against the run in the NFL. But he does his take on skills aren't a concern on tape. He plays with good pad level and understands how to leverage blocks. He's a good cover skills and could help as a pass rusher as well. So he could develop into a core special teams player along with that. So if you think about now, as we were highlighting off air with a couple with both Andy Makowitz and also another friend of mine, value in terms of where they can contribute as well becomes something to think about. One of the players that we want to highlight from the wide receiver pool, obviously we didn't go that route. We've had some people talk about a player like Gandy Golden as maybe being a target. He is the 14th best player currently on the board here and is listed as the 83rd overall prospect in this draft. You go down a little bit further, though, and if I'm talking about some of these prospects, one of the ones that Andy has been highlighting here in terms of a Joe Judge type of player. We get inside there, and this would be more looking at the 110 pick in the 4th round, and that's when you're thinking about a player like Joe Reed out of Virginia. Now, he's 6'1", 224, so when you think about wanting to get one of these big body guys in, something that we don't have necessarily in this wide receiver core, that he is not. But what you do have is a versatile weapon. This is a wide receiver that is going to line up on the outside, on the inside. He can come out of the backfield. He's considered to be one of the most dangerous kick returners as well coming into this draft. So you're talking about getting a high-level special teams contributor, and in that way, you're thinking about Joe Judge, special teams background, and you're also thinking about versatility. So there's something to be said for someone like that who maybe is going to need some development as far as just refining his route running and things like that. But a weapon, a versatile weapon on offense, and also a very high-level, strong special teams contributor, that maybe is a player you look at listed at 118 overall, and us at 110 maybe falls into that range, right? And currently would be the 5th highest available wide receiver. So there's a couple of guys there ahead of him, like Gandy Golden, a KJ Hill out of Ohio State, obviously. And then you talk about another player that could be on the radar for the Giants in a more traditional sense of getting a big-bodied outside guy, and that's Colin Johnson out of Texas, 107 on the big board, 6'6", 222. And again, this guy will go up and get you the 50-50 balls. He's pretty strong at the point of attack. He's going to come down. It'd be a nice red zone threat for the Giants. Doesn't have the best speed in the world, but is quick enough, right? And you wouldn't expect it. Didn't work out at the combine, and without having pro day opportunities for a lot of these players, that can end up being a little bit damaging just in terms of potentially putting some quality numbers on tape that allow you to reflect maybe beyond what people saw at the college level. You think about a guy like Chase Claypool, right, who puts that blazing 40 time down and all of a sudden opens up the possibilities for himself about where he might go in the draft, ultimately landing with the Steelers. We'll play them this year. We'll get to see him in person. We will play the Arizona Cardinals. We'll get to see Simmons in person. I'm trying to think of some of the other guys that have gone here today. Taylor, who obviously was the target that I wanted to see happen. He went to a squad that we will also see. I cannot remember off the tip of my tongue where he landed, but it is one of the teams that will be taking. He landed with the Seattle Seahawks, who came up to get him. So we will see him this year as well. So a lot of the guys that we had discussed about being possible target for the Giants, we'll get a chance to see them. It just won't be on the field for the New York Football Giants in that capacity. We come back to the board here talking about Grant Delpit and Jedrick Wills for the Browns in the 2nd and then 1st round in reverse order. Now that pick is in there for the Browns here at 88 overall in the 3rd. And we'll see where they go. They have some wide receiver needs potentially, but they have some other opportunities they could also look at here as they work their way through. And they'll highlight, of course, the disaster that has been the quarterback situation for them up until now, where it feels like they have some confidence, though time will tell, right? This is hopefully them turning the tides. And when you think about a franchise that has just been muddled in turmoil. Last year was supposed to be a big year for them, turned out to be a bit of a disaster. Now I think, though, remember, you bring in Jedrick Wills, you brought in Conklin in free agency, so they've done some things here. They've done a lot better in free agency and now the start of this draft to help really put themselves in a position with a lot of weapons on both sides of the ball. Now these are some of those little pieces that you do to take yourself from being 6-10 to getting to 8-8, 9-7, and really starting to be in that divisional conversation, or at least in the playoff conversation. As we know, they're in a very difficult spot there with some of the competition they have inside their own division. Trying to look over and project where the Giants could go. As I was highlighting before, we saw that Cushenberry fell but still went. Hennessy got taken a lot sooner, jumped over Baez. Baez still sits out there right now, currently listed as the 20th best available player on the board as the pick is in for the Browns here. Again, for me, the difference between Baez at 20 versus, for example, let's just talk about a couple of these guys and we'll highlight who the Browns take here. But Baez for me, right? 89th overall on the board. Okay. Go down to the next available behind him, and that's going to be Keith Ishmael out of San Diego State as the commissioner reflects on some of the positive donations that have been made in effort to help the relief of the COVID-19 pandemic. And now he will highlight the selection by the Cleveland Browns, and that will be Jordan Elliott, the defensive tackle. So just to reflect on that big board real quick here for a second, that is the best available player on the board. He's the 41st prospect listed here. So incredible value here from the Browns, and he'll plug right into the middle, 6'4", 302. That's a very nice selection for the Browns. Obviously, this player falls, and you get arguably a high second-round talent nearing the back end of the third. So as we take a look back into that center position, we were saying you highlight a player like Baez, and I'll read it off here, 6'4", 314, 89th overall on the board. But when you start to look at it, he's a fundamentally sound run blocker with good size, gets his hands inside, latches and anchors, and well in the pass protection. He's versatile enough to provide depth at guard. Baez is a below-average athlete who doesn't show great range climbing to the second level in the run game and is going to need help working against quicker interior pass rushers. So when you think about a player like that, a lot of upside there, right? Does some things positively, but still has some areas to improve on. Listed at 89th overall. Move right down behind him and take a look at Keith Ishmael. Again, 112 on the big board. So, nearly you're talking about 20 solid picks behind in terms of value, as the Vikings pick is in at 89 now. But again, 6'3", 309 out of San Diego State. Technically sound pass blocker who works his hands inside and fights to stay in front of his assignments. He's quick and tends to take sound angles climbing to the second level of the run game. He's tough and blocks to the whistle, but he fits better in a zone-heavy scheme than he does in a power-heavy scheme. Ishmael has some experience playing guard. So, in terms of the differentials between them, you're not seeing a lot there, just on the pre-draft analysis on these guys. And by the way, the fact that he can get to the second level bodes well for him, especially when you're talking about in a run blocking scheme. And also, as Cameron Danzigler will be coming off the board here, the cornerback going to the Minnesota Vikings. A player like Keith Ishmael represents a guy, if he can get to the second level and be effective, we don't need a power, a zone-heavy scheme is a better option for the Giants than a power-heavy scheme. That's not what we're looking to do with New York Giant football, right? We want to get Saquon Barkley out in space. We want to give him opportunities to work on the edge. So, and if he is going to go between the tackles, you want to have a center that can get to the second level and grab one of those linebackers and create a problem there, potentially for the defense at the second level. So for me, again, I look at it and say the difference between Baez versus, I can even make the case that Ishmael is a better prospect in some ways, specifically for Giants' needs. When you think about it from that standpoint, I would be a little bit disappointed if the Giants were to take an area of need at center and go for Baez at 99 when you have an opportunity to wait, address another area of need on this roster, something that isn't going to be there 11 picks later, and then still get a quality selection there. And if you go beyond him, by the way, after you look at Ishmael, then you get Nick Harris out of Washington, and then you talk about a guy that I was interested in, obviously, and that's Darrell Williams out of Mississippi State, 6'2", 304. Listen, he is a much deeper prospect. And just to be clear, in terms of falling off a cliff, 89 Baez, 112 for Keith Ishmael, 46 for Nick Harris, who is a solid player as well. And then you talk about the Darrell Williams going to be 238. So that, this is the wave that we're talking about. Pick is in for the Texans. I'll go ahead and just take a look here, as it seems like Bill O'Brien is having an intense conversation. Though the pick is in, and he seems pretty upset here, as he will move off camera. So that's interesting. Seems like Bill O'Brien may be having an issue, even though it says the pick is in and things should be okay. I'm going to take a minute here just to communicate with Andy Makowitz as well, and we'll see where the Texans go here at the 90th selection. Linebacker Jonathan Greenard will come off the board here out of Florida. So as I just try to get that off the board there for myself. So again, the reason why we're talking about the center so much is because when you go back over to the big board overall and we see Greenard comes off there, nice guy gets off the edge, maybe a little bit stiff, but a nice big body player out of Florida, going to be a nice value selection there as well. Patriots are on the clock now at 91. Baltimore and Tennessee will follow up behind them. With the Patriots going here, you start to look over that board again. Players and other areas the Giants could talk about. If Troy Dye was there, I think that's a valuable prospect, and I'd rather take that look on him as the pick comes in for the Patriots. Take him there, and then look for Ishmael at 110 in the 4th round. If you go beyond Troy Dye, again, a couple of wide receivers you could look at. One of the things that we start to talk about as well here as a reminder is because we didn't have that 3rd round selection at 4th overall, what would have been the 68th pick in this draft, this is what makes it a little bit trickier, because I can make the case that what you'd like to accomplish at 68, 99, and 110 is getting an edge rusher, getting yourself a center, and getting yourself a wide receiver. Instead, you're now limited down to 2 of these selections. Now, one of the things that we've highlighted here was that speculation that Nick Gates has taken reps at center. Theoretically, if the Giants would believe that he's capable of moving inside, or potentially they still have belief in Spencer Pulley, or they have belief in John Halapio, then if center isn't on the board here, it really opens up the Giants' options in terms of being able to go outside linebacker, edge rusher, and then pair that up with wide receiver. And now you're talking about really addressing a lot of the key areas of need that you wanted to in the first basically three rounds, as you get that early 4th round selection. If you're unable to do that, though, you do run into a little bit of issue here, as Roger Goodell is taking a very relaxed stance now as he announces the Patriots selection, which will be Devin Asiasi. That will be the tight end out of UCLA. So trying to replace, obviously, Gronkowski, who was retired, but he comes back, and they trade him down to Tampa. We know they like to build in and around the tight end position on that offense. Big-bodied fella, 6'3", but has nice size, and you're watching him just kind of bleed right off that line, run that seam pattern, good agility, gets his back turned around there to the quarterback to make that nice catch out in traffic there. And this is a receiving tight end. Nice little leap there down the sideline as well for them. So as the Ravens come onto the clock here, and we'll try to think about the teams that are going to have needs here as well at the center position. In some ways, what you're doing is basically following me along in my quest to not have the Giants end up with Biadez, because I think it would be not reaching for a player. The value is there in terms of when you're taking him, but my preference would be Ishmael. I think is a valuable selection. You're not losing a lot in terms of the return as far as waiting that extra handful of picks, and then you're still getting a quality player outside of it. So let's just talk a little bit about where we stand right now as we move through, right? Ravens are on there. When we think about their areas of need, offensive line is listed there 3rd on the list. However, let's go over to the Titans and take a look where they land, talking about cornerback, defensive line, linebacker as well. So we're not getting anyone here that maybe is going to be in a position. Offensive line, 3rd listed need for the Green Bay Packers. We know the Denver Broncos recently took the center. That's where Lloyd Cushenberry fell earlier at 66, and a nice value pick for them. Cornerback, D-line, linebacker for the Kansas City Chiefs. So once again, Not going to see any need there for them necessarily. Let's highlight the Cleveland Browns, defensive line, linebacker, and offensive line. Now, offensive line, any of these lists that are saying offensive line, potentially you can be thinking interior, especially if you think about a team like the Cleveland Browns who have already taken care of the outside. So would offensive line still be a need that they could look at the center position, certainly. The Baltimore Ravens, D-line, linebacker, offensive line. And then there you are sitting with the Giants. And again, right now, linebacker listed ahead of offensive line. But by the way, center is not going to get singled out here. So any of these teams that you've seen get that tag of offensive line in this mix, outside of obviously the Denver Broncos, who have done that already for themselves, maybe could be in the market. But most of these teams are getting listed with the Ravens on the clock. Most of these teams are being listed here as the third, sometimes even the fourth highest need on their list. But third for the Ravens, fourth there, for the Titans. Packers come in there as the third highest need on their board. We skip past over the Broncos. You get the Chiefs listed there as their fourth highest need. Browns possibly, so as you work down these lists, and then the Ravens come up again, third highest need there. They'll be selecting twice. Their first pick is in right now, and with offensive line being an area of need, again, I would have to go inside to really take a look at specifically if they would need a center potentially here. But with two picks this quick, this is where they could maybe look to have that opportunity. We'll see as their pick has come in here, and they jump over to Kurt Warner on the live coverage. And back over we go. I feel like because I've talked about him, that means that Biadasz is an inevitability. The only thing I can maybe think too is that the Giants want to go the way of center at this selection. It would certainly be a valuable option to just look past Biadasz and think about the best level of fit for the position. Again, I think that the difference between these two players is relatively the same, and Ishmael is a better scheme fit for the New York Football Giants and what they want to accomplish. If they hold off and do not go center here at the 99th selection, then again, I take a look at probably one of two options. I like Troy Dye, the linebacker. I also like the wide receiver group here in terms of the value that you can get. Your choice about whether or not you want to take a look at potentially a larger receiver in Gannon Goldie. We mentioned briefly KJ Hill there as well, 98th prospect on the board. 107 is the Colin Johnson, as we had mentioned, and right behind him, 118 overall would be Joe Reed. Beyond that, if you think about now let's talk about the idea of getting back into the fifth round, right? We've already highlighted that center, this is probably the range you need to get one in. And you can acknowledge by where the drop-off is to the next available center in terms of that value. Ravens pick has come in. Devin Duvernay, wide receiver out of Texas, so he was the best available wide receiver on the board. 5'11", 200 pounds, 81 overall on the big board. Slot receiver, built like a running back, who has excellent top-end speed. So obviously, need being met there for the Baltimore Ravens. And again, this is that scenario you talk about with the Giants where any of these targets, well, we don't need a slot receiver. We have almost too many slot receivers at this stage. So again, if we think about getting back now to let's talk about getting to that fifth round area, at which point you still have to remember that the compensatory picks are there. So 110 is when you're sitting there fourth overall. You're going to be at least another 40 later. So around 150 is where you start to say is the top end of the draft, top end of the fifth round, excuse me. At that point, and you figure that's about 60 players from now. So some of, and listen, all these things are going to shuffle. This is where teams are going for need as opposed to just how the board lays it out. But you start to get into that range. That's when you're talking about, could a Lipscomb out of Vanderbilt maybe be there? That's possible. I think Peoples-Jones is certainly an option there, 126 overall. And as you work your way through other things, just other positions to be thinking about here as well, right? Linebacker starts to open up here at that stage as well. A guy that I was really big on, obviously that we're not going to have the need for now, was Tanner Muse, 134 overall. He posted the second fastest 40 time for a safety at the combine. He reads quarterbacks and rarely gets caught out of position. He runs well on a straight line, but is tight and struggles to change directions quickly on tape. He tracks the ball and flashes opportunistic ball skills, and he's a hard-nosed run defender. this was the only thing that, you talk about. This is kind of that safety linebacker-ish kind of hybrid. If the Giants could maybe see a player like this fall into the 6th round, I think he'd still be worth targeting because you can flex him down into the box and play off of him. But listen, you take McKinney. This is more when you think about in the vein of if we're sitting there and you haven't taken a safety yet, that'd be a great 5th-round value selection that has some versatility, obviously limitations at that point in the draft, but still has some value there. Titans pick will come in here now as they highlight Harbaugh in his home, taking care of the draft there. He's got the 5 o'clock shadow rocking. Let's talk about the 93rd pick now overall for the Titans. That pick has come in. They took Wilson out of Georgia, who was the bookend with our new tackle, Andrew Thomas, there. So a nice selection for them at 29. Then they took the cornerback, Fulton, there at the 61st pick there in the 2nd round. So we'll see where they go here at 93. And again, thinking about some other players that maybe could fall for us as we look deeper in the draft. Strobridge listed as a defensive tackle, 6'4", 275. Going to be hard to think about him being an edge value for us. James Lynch out of Baylor, 102 on the big board, 289. Now, that's a big boy. You're putting him down the line if you bring him in. If the Giants were going to be in the market for something like that, Gross Matos may have been an option for them. As we highlighted on the previous broadcast, you're talking about a player that we have the coach on the defensive line. If it was a real value there and we thought it was worth it, I think you would have seen us pull that trigger. Beyond that, again, it really just feels like it's falling into that, right? Cornerback, edge, defensive tackle, and tight end are the biggest needs for the Titans currently. So not a lot of opportunity for them to maybe be looking at taking a center as far as just having the best options available for us. Other players, I had looked at Curtis Weaver early on in some of the scouting. Unfortunately, this is excuse me. I was thinking of a different Weaver. I apologize. And I don't see him listed here right now. Curtis Weaver, on the other hand, since we stopped along him, listed at 265, 6'2". Weaver doesn't have elite first step quickness or closing speed, but he is an effective hand fighter who flashes an effective inside move rushing the passer. Listen, this is a guy you're not going to stand up as much. He's disruptive run defender who slips blocks and makes tackles. So not going to be a guy that we're going to be looking at just because the redundancy that we already have in terms of stuffing the run. Again, our target is getting after the quarterback with consistency. That's what we're trying to accomplish here. One of the other ones when you talk about the offensive line, again, if you wanted to make a case for getting an opportunity to take a player that would have high value, 91st overall on the big board, that is Prince Tega Wananogo. I've highlighted him before out of Auburn, 6'5", 308. Big frame with adequate bulk for initial quickness. He falls off blocks and is below average second-level blocker in the run game. There's some pop in his punch, but his hand placement is inconsistent and he lunges too much. Let's talk about taking him maybe out of our desirables, right? This is, again, where I think to me, I look it over. I'd rather go outside linebacker edge first and then worry about the center at that 4th round selection. Outside of those two positions, if you're going pure value maybe, tight end, you're not going to go that route here unless you heard about a potential trade scenario happening, and this would maybe be the range that could be discussed. And then the Giants could possibly think about taking a tight end potentially, and there's some value there as well. So as we wait for the Titans pick to officially be announced here, 93rd overall, let's walk down that for a second here. Would an Adam Trautman be a viable option should he be there and the Giants were able to execute a trade? Some of those things have been talked about. 3rd round would certainly be a viable option for an Evan Ingram. Some teams now, the Patriots would have been in the perfect position, right? Unfortunately, they pick up a tight end. Otherwise, maybe we would have had them on the market there. Instead, we're talking about Trautman, who ran the 3rd fastest 3-cone at the combine, quicker than fast, and flashes as a route runner. He is not a track star, but he plays a little bit faster than his time speed. His technique is inconsistent, but he is a willing blocker who plays with an edge. Good enough, but not great. Certainly not a prospect that you want to go after when you're just thinking about that idea of bringing in a quality talent position. We won't belabor that too much here. Obviously, a trade is not imminent. Listen, Troy Dye, 9th best available player. I think first target that the Giants should be looking at here. You want to follow it up and say Gandon Goldie, Gaither is maybe in that range as well for the Giants at 6'2", again, 224. He can be a special teams contributor, so maybe he's on the radar there as well. Once you move past him, there's not a ton. Those are probably the two players that you have listed there. For the Titans, again, cornerback, edge, defensive tackle, and tight end were their needs list. We'll have Green Bay coming up next here on the clock. And we'll take a look here. I'm waiting for this Titans pick to come in just so we can see as Green Bay will be the next team up on the board. They will go with Evans, the running back out of Appalachian State. So they bring in someone to share the load potentially and spell Henry there in Tennessee. And then in the long term, maybe you're talking about someone who can ultimately take over maybe down the road at some point along the way. But here in the third round, you're still taking a reasonable shot here. This is when you want guys that are going to be contributors for you. And as they highlight him at 5'10", 203, we continue just to try to build the board in front of us as far as where we think the Giants could go. Again, getting the best value and then making the just really the strongest case for where they should go here as you look at the board. I think, again, you're probably in this range. Yeah, I can only really take two here. So as I just try to convey some information to my co-host, I apologize for a little bit of the delay there. Pick is immediately in for the Green Bay Packers. They took Jordan Love in the first. They took A.J. Dillon in the second round. He lands in a very nice spot. If you listen to the podcast, we talked with John Hilleman. He started his collegiate career in Boston College. And A.J. Dillon was the reason maybe why he transferred out to Rutgers for his last year. I think ultimately wanted to come back home to New Jersey. And this pick came in very quickly for the Green Bay Packers. This will be DeGuara, the tight end out of Cincinnati. So Packers get their tight end, another possible trade partner for the Giants. When you talk about Evan Ingram, it doesn't happen. So now, interestingly enough, if you want to think about the Green Bay Packers, you're talking about a team that goes and takes Jordan Love, probably not what Aaron Rodgers wants to see, but then they turn right back around. They get him a fantastic weapon in A.J. Dillon. Now they get him another weapon here in DeGuara, 6'2", 242. Not the biggest tight end in the world, and I'm going to see here as they show some of these highlights on him. Listen, does enough, right? Nice little one-handed grab there over the top, certainly. And now we'll take a look as he lines up off in the eye set here. He's going to sweep down the line, come around there, show the good hands off, use a little bit of quickness. At 242 and 6'2", you're talking about a guy that's going to line up in a couple different spots for you in the backfield, in front of, and as they show here, some of the highlights of that blocking that he's capable of doing. So that's really what you're talking about, having a guy that gets around two levels here, but also gives you the dual threat. So we can talk about maybe taking a look here. I'll try to pull up and see. Let's see if we get the read on him. He came up here trying to take a look at where he lists. DeGuara. Boy, I'm having, unless they pulled him already here. It looks like they did. So they already got him out the door on me. Let me see if I can switch over There we go. Let's take a look at DeGuara and just talk about 4.7240. I'll take a look at the profile here real quick and just see if we get a breakdown on him. 5.96 prospect grade. You are talking about 25 bench reps, 35-inch vertical for him. And when you think about the strengths, takes run blocking duties to heart. There you go. Good angles up to second level and squares his target. Finds the blocks and fits and sustains. Counted on to help seal the edge in the run game. Basketball feet and fluidity in his route breaks. Stems defenders out of place with sharp head fake. So this is a guy that is a strong blocker and then also offers you some receiving as well. So not a bad job there by the Green Bay Packers to target and acquire there as far as getting a versatile weapon that can do both things for you at the tight end position, something that you would probably wish that the Giants would be doing there as well over these last handful of seasons. And they've done that in this last year, right? You bring in Caden Smith and then you get Toyoloa, so you certainly done a nice job there. Offensive tackle for the Broncos is listed as a need here. They obviously already took their center and Cushenberry earlier this round. And because of that, now you're talking about, again, being in this position where we are now at 95. You'll have Kansas City. Cleveland will come back up again here. So we're just a handful of picks away before we get onto the board. So just a little bit more time here before we can figure out where the Giants are going to go. Again, feels like maybe need and value is falling right to them with Biadez. I just would be curious about how they look at him and whether or not they think he is the best fit within their offense. And ultimately, if that's the route that they choose to go, I'm going to have to just say that you got to trust them, right? You trusted them. You trust them with a player like with a player like Thomas. You trust them with taking a player like McKinney, and then you'd have to trust them with taking a player like Biadez. Beyond that, though, we can think about, again, we talked about 5th round. We have our 5th and our 6th, and we have a whole bunch of 7s. Interesting at this point right now, tomorrow will be a very exciting day for the Giants because with 4 7th-round selections, you have to think that at that point, Dave Gettleman's going to use those assets to move around the board as Roger Goodell will announce the Broncos selection. They will take McDelvin Ajim, the defensive tackle out of Arkansas. So defensive tackle comes off the board here, trying to spot and highlight where he sits on the board. And this is what we're talking about, though. I'm not coming up with where he lists out. So that means unless they, again, if they've pulled him quickly, then maybe that's the case. And maybe a hair or two behind here, right? As far as the feed versus the live updates here. So not seeing them there. And you like to kind of keep an eye on where these prospects fall here. Next up on the board are the Chiefs. Their pick is already in, so they're coming right to the podium immediately. We'll see if they list their best available needs. They did have offensive line listed among them. Excuse me. However, not specifically sure if center would be chief among them. The overall board right now, you've got players like the quarterbacks back-to-back here, Fromm and Eason. You're talking about 54th overall prospect in Fromm, 56th overall in Eason there, certainly. There's a show John Elway with some of his family taking care of the draft. Beyond that, though, you've got the tight ends, the cornerback in Akeem Robertson, the 5'8", though, so the size hurting him, obviously, out of Louisiana Tech. Best available, again, Trotman first listed there at the tight end position by Mel Kiper. And then Malik Harrison is still there as well. Take a look at where he falls on the board because it's a bit of a shuffle from what we're seeing here. Then Harrison Bryant. Then you got Tyre Phillips listed there as well. You talk about like best available from Mel Kiper's standpoint. You see how he's moving a little bit along there as well. Selection is in. Goodell will announce that. Lucas Niang there, the offensive tackle. So they go offensive line, they go with the tackle there. He'll come off the board here in the compensatory stage of the. Oh, that would actually mark the final official pick, and now we get into the compensatory picks. Let's take a look at those inside linebackers, as we mentioned here. How about the fact, listen, Jacob Phillips is still there, 6'3", 229, listed at 121 overall on the big board. There's just so much value to be had here in these areas of the draft. That's something very interesting to think about. But I wanted to take a look. You got Malik Walker down there a little bit of ways? Yeah, listen, Jacob Phillips is a nice player at 6'3", 229. Again, 121 overall. He is a tall, lean linebacker with good speed and explosive lower body strength. Disciplined run defender who understands fits, but he gets moved too often by bigger blockers. He is at his best in underneath zone coverage. He's too limited to be consistently trusted in man coverage, and he does not offer much in as a pass rusher. So that's going to be that kind of thing where, again, luxury pick. If you get to the 5th round selection and you find him sitting there, maybe there's value. But prior to that, you're talking about a guy that's going to get swept up by some of the bigger players, and then also isn't going to give you enough consistency where you really need it, and that is, of course, getting after the quarterback. For me, again, Troy Dye remains the target here. I would prefer that if you're going to talk about taking this selection here with the Browns pick being in, my preference would be to see Troy Dye making this happen here because, again, he offers the biggest need that we have, which is edge rusher presence. That has to be first and foremost for me prior to center, and then you can still get a quality player at the 110 pick. If I could lock it in, give me Troy Dye, give me Ishmael at the 110 spot. I can walk away and be happy with that. Here come the Browns with the 97th selection overall. 2 more picks to go. There's 1 more pick in the Baltimore Ravens before we'll be on the clock. There's Jacob Phillips. So we highlight him, and he comes off the board. So another nice selection here for this Cleveland Brown team, continuing to build out that defensive side of the ball now. They've done a nice job for themselves. And again, we talk about a team that did work in free agency, took care of the other side of the offensive line. I would expect, you want to talk about a team that could see a significant shift in terms of win-loss from 6-10. Don't be surprised if they are a 3+ win team the upcoming season and find themselves on the right side of 500. A nice selection here. Now, again, we talk about when you're targeting them. 121 overall. They're taking him here at 97. So, the value meeting need and targeting the player that you want. Once you get towards the back end of the 3rd into the 4th, it's really about the players that you like, that you think fit your scheme, and being comfortable going out there and taking them. Okay. Just in case you're wondering, a guy like Troy Dye, as I've been highlighting here, at 6'3", 231, considered to be a 6.15 draft prospect. Let's just highlight real quickly here. They took Delpit. These are LSU players. Delpit went 44th. Fulton, the cornerback, went to Tennessee at 61. 69 for Damian Lewis to Seattle. 83 for Lloyd Cushenberry to Denver. And now Jacob Phillips marking the 5th one off the board. The pick is already in for the Baltimore Ravens, which means that momentarily the New York Football Giants will once again be on the clock here with an opportunity. Okay, so pick in for the Ravens. Giants will be on the clock now momentarily to finish it off. Their 6.15 prospect grade for Troy Dye. Good backup who could become a starter. You're talking about a late 3rd round, early 4th round pick with starter potential. That is worth taking here. Inside the details on him, you want to go strengths and weaknesses. On the strength side of it, scouts say he keeps the locker room loose, so he's a good locker room guy. We're going to go ahead and take a brief pause here just for a minute, and then I'll dive in with that, with the information in and around this prospect in Troy Dye. All right, jump back in there. That was Malik Harrison. Just have to take a quick little conversation in and around the NFL draft. But as we debated here, I'd like to see Troy Dye be the selection here for the New York Football Giants. The pick immediately comes in. That means that they like what they have available to them. Let's go ahead and prepare ourselves for a Biadasz selection here. Again, taking a look at the needs on the board, understanding that when you look at the overall currently, he ends up landing there. Tyler Biadasz listed as the 89th overall prospect here. Ahead of him, if you wanted to talk about any other areas the Giants might take a look at, I can only really reasonably say that Troy Dye could be an option for them. Maybe they could go wide receiver potentially, but Troy Dye, Davis Gaithers, these are the only real names that I would expect to have an opportunity to go here over top of. They list it now. By the way, though, you want to talk about team needs: edge, linebacker, cornerback, safety, wide receiver. That is the order that Mel Kiper lists their team needs in. So if they're not even highlighting the center position as being one of the areas of need. So that's certainly something to consider as this pick comes up. Doesn't mean that they won't go Tyler Biadasz, but they are listing 5 other positions right now. Now, safety's already been taken care of, so you can mark that down. So I don't know why they still have that listed out there technically, but I just, you would think, now Hennessy was supposedly a player that they were interested in. He got taken a lot earlier. Obviously, Cushenberry did not make it there either. You see Joe Judge in his location. You see Dave Gettleman doing the work with the towel draped over the back of the TV in Giants NY Pride. But this is it right here. Let's take a listen.
2020 NFL Draft. The New York Giants select Matt Harris, tackle.
So here we go. Let's take this thing in an entirely different direction. They go with Matt Peart. Now, what this tells you is, if you want to believe it, this would tell you that they believe in Nick Yates moving over to the center position for them. That's what I would think. Now, you still also have, of course, John Halapio coming back from injury. As they show some highlights here on Matt Peart, I will happily highlight what we are talking about here. This is an interesting choice for the Giants. It means that they're talking about finishing out, making this offensive line completely rebuilt. It also, in my mind, spells the end of Nate Solder's time on this roster. Let's go ahead and get Matt Peart up on the board here in terms of his draft profile. Obviously a little bit surprised here at this selection. I would have thought there's some needs there that you can go after, but to be fair, I'm basing it off of saying, you know, Gates could be your starting right tackle. Now, if the thinking is they did enough to show you this past year that he can be kicked inside to work at center, and if you obviously felt like fixing this offensive line was a priority for you, this is certainly a player that can accomplish that for you. Taking him a second here to pull up his draft profile to go over, and then we'll think about ahead here now. 11 more selections before they'll be back on the board to draft once again. Okay, Matthew Peart comes out of here. This is, listen, take this with a grain of salt, right? Out of Connecticut, 6'7", 318 pounds. Let's hear what Mel Kiper may have to say. Okay, so they're moving on to the Raiders selection now at 100. That was, I believe, originally there with the Patriots. They may have moved off of that as well. Okay, so you're talking about a 6'14" prospect grade backup who could become a starter. You can take that with a grain of salt. 6'7", 318 pounds. He came in. Let's take a look at those strengths and weaknesses. He is he's beautiful off the bus. Gotta like that. Beautiful off the bus with long arms and athletic build. Frame carries weight easily with room for more. Plus initial quickness out of stance. Movement is easy and smooth when moving laterally or on stretch plays. He has change of direction talent to adjust to targets in space. Started doing better job of unlocking hips later in the season. Tons of athletic potential to work with in the pass sets. Nimble feet with ability to mirror once he latches in. Could offer swing tackle flexibility as well. Started all 4 seasons at college. So obviously has a lot of experience. Played all the way through as a senior as well. Weaknesses, play strength is not up to par, unable to bench press defenders off his frame, flexible but needs more discipline to keeping pad levels lower, gets overextended and beaten inside in the run game, doesn't show finishing demeanor or toughness. So these are some things to be concerned about. Hands are limp, lazy, and miss proper landing spots too often. Disjointed movement, must learn to throw punches with better urgency. Feet occasionally stall when mirroring at the top of the rush, and poor hand placement and redirect power doom him when his edge is challenged. Boy, between the beautiful off the bus commentary combined with the doom, that is certainly an interesting one. That being the case, a couple of things you can think about here. One, it means that fixing the offensive line was a priority. You found a pick that made sense for you at this spot, and you can examine whether or not you think it may take him a little bit of developmental time. The belief has to be here that he can be the right tackle of the future for this roster, so you're securing the anchors and the bookends for this team. The secondary thing that I think you have to acknowledge, while there were some players there and you can say best value available at that time, you also have to consider the idea that you're talking about the Giants being comfortable with the linebacking room currently as constructed. I'm sure they may take a look at some players here, but at the end of the day, as Tanner Muse, my safety selection there, actually goes all the way here at the back end of the third. So these are guys that have jumped up in a lot of areas as far as those prospects were concerned. Make another note of him, as I've had a lot of my prospects go pretty high in the draft here today. A little feather in my cap, even though unfortunately they did not go to the New York Football Giants. The other thing is, you have to think that they're pretty satisfied with where they stand as far as the linebacking room, Fackrell being at least a one-year Band-Aid, O'Shea Ximenez obviously going to be a player that you expect to take a big step here in his second year as well. So, listen, you can't address every single need that you have, obviously, and this may be a situation where the Giants are just looking to get the best value at some areas that they feel like they wanted to address. And at that point on the board, you're talking about a guy who the Giants view as being someone worthy of a third round, basically border third, fourth round selection here. And they think that they can go ahead and move themselves in the right direction on this offensive line and set yourselves up for the future. To be perfectly fair, I think there's a lot of valuable players out there that I thought they may look to tack onto. Again, I think it has to be an indication about how they feel about some combination of Jalapeno or Nick Gates at the center position. So if the reality here probably has to be that Nick Gates is going to make a positional change, because otherwise you're talking about having now Thomas and Soldier and Fleming and Gates, and now you're talking about Pert as well at the tackle position alone. This, to me, does spell the end, one might think, potentially of Soldier's time here. You'll take a cap hit, you'll have some dead money, but you'll be able to move on from it. And now, however you want to shake it out, whoever starts there at right tackle, you feel like you have the guy of the future. Probably indicates, again, that the Gates wasn't going to be the future at right tackle. He can now remain as the swing. You still have some depth there with Fleming as well. So some options on the table here for the Giants. With the 110 pick here coming up in just a handful, be interesting to see now what is the position they look at. Again, if they have the opportunity, I still think that Ishmael is a solid pick here. The fact that maybe they didn't go for Biadez, one could be grading. One, the other end of it could be need, right? When they listed those areas of need, they were not highlighting center on that board. So at that point, you start to turn your attention to some of these other areas. Specifically, you think about, again, wide receiver and linebacker and where some of these players could be landing for them in another 10 selections. To my mind, I would be looking and saying, here again, we're talking about a couple of these linebackers you may want to take a look at. Then you can get into that wide receiver room as well, certainly. And then beyond that, again, I think that Ishmael is a quality center to be able to go out and tackle for yourself. In my mind, I will take Ishmael at 110 and be happy with that. And then I'll also take one of the wide receiver weapons if they want to go that way. Beyond that, when you start to move a little bit further down, and like I said, you're starting to see how the players that are getting taken, they're coming from wherever the team, these individual teams are seeing that value. It's not necessarily going to be dictated by where the board is and where these best players are listed. Beyond that, though, again, the Joe Reed there would certainly be an option. We dig a little bit deeper, and you want to think about, You can take a look at, a couple of these cornerbacks possibly that, you may want to add some more depth. I think that they've done that already now. And then, one of the sneaky ones that we could talk about here, not necessarily 110, but keep your eye on the idea listed as a defensive end. That certainly is where he stands, but a 5th round selection to maybe watch for would be Alton Robinson out of Syracuse. Andy will love to hear me say that, but it'll be interesting to see where the Giants go here in a handful of picks. I'm going to just briefly take a step away here. I'll come right back in just a handful of selections here when the Giants get back on the board at 110. We'll break down where they go, see how he fits in on the roster, and what it means for the overall draft that the Giants have had to this point, as we will wrap up today's coverage and then come back in tomorrow with the shame on me. We're not going to get to that 110 selection, right? This is going to round out, and then we'll have to go into tomorrow. So we get to wrap our coverage here. In the first 3 rounds, as we know, the Giants have taken offensive tackle Andrew Thomas. They get safety Xavier McKinney, and now Matthew Pert, the offensive tackle out of Connecticut, will come in as well to ideally complete the offensive line rebuild. Certainly be interesting to see who else trickles off the board here to finish out the round before we think about tomorrow, rounds 4 through 7. Again, 4 7th-round picks for the Giants. Expect some level of movement. Get yourself into the 5th, into the 6th. Target some players that you want and finish off some of the rebuild and contributors that you'd like to see on this roster. As always, for the One Giant podcast, thank you for checking in with us here. I hope you enjoyed some of the coverage. I was scrambling, waiting to see who was going to come off the board there, and I was caught off guard by Matthew Pert. We'll dive a little bit deeper on him, have some additional information, try to take a look and find out what we can learn about Nick Gates to center and what this offensive line could be constructed like, or can we anticipate possibly the New York Football Giants still looking to attack that center position here at some point in the draft? You can follow us on social media, One Giant Podcast. Head over to iTunes, download, rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Sunday, you can probably anticipate a nice episode coming out, recapping everything that we've done here in the draft, and then thinking about potential targets that the Giants may have remaining out there in free agency. How does the depth charts realign here following this, and just where can we expect them to go before we head into the offseason, the 2020 year. Alex Highsmith, outside linebacker, taken there by the Pittsburgh Steelers. Big fan of him as a player as well. A nice prospect going to the Steelers. Thank you for checking in with us. We will, of course, be back soon talking all things New York Football Giants.